Hey, it's Chris Goff, and in this training video, I'm going to show you how to wholesale multiple properties from the same owner at the same time. How I found the deal, the conversation with the owner's reaction to my offer, how to construct the contract, and how I sold it for a quick profit. Not to mention the lessons I learned along the way, where I ended up making more than $18,000 and how I got robbed at the same time. You're not going to want to miss this part of the story at the end. The reason I wanted to put this training video together is that I see a lot of wholesalers ask, how do you do the contract when there's multiple properties? How do you analyze the deal, and where do you find the buyer? So although this was my first multiple property deal that happened over 20 years ago, these tips and lessons still apply in today's world of wholesaling. So let's get into it. So I started wholesaling in Texas in a small town. I tell you, it took me 3 months to do my first deal. But after that, I was hooked. I was on fire doing 5 to 7 deals a month. But over time, it just kind of felt stale, like I was driving the same neighborhoods, looking at the same properties, and I wanted to look for something different in a different area. So I chose Waco, Texas, which is about an hour and a half away. And I got up early in the morning. I just set out to drive. And I got to Waco and just started driving neighborhoods, looking for potential vacant properties, looking for sale by owner properties, and looking for rent by owner properties. I started to accumulate a bunch of addresses. I drove back home and took me another hour and a half to get back home. The very next day, I started to research the properties on the tax assessor because that's how you did it back in the day. Most of the stuff we did, we had to use direct mail. There wasn't a lot of, cell phones to where you could just do some skip tracing. So I did mail out a ton of letters. And there was this one property that I did find in Waco, and it had a small for rent sign. So I called the owner and I said, "Hi, my name is Chris. And I noticed this house for rent in Waco. I was actually curious to see if you'd be open to selling the house." And he, thought about it for a second. And he said, "Yeah, I want to sell it, but I want to sell everything that I own. What do you have?" And he said, "I have 18 houses." And I was like, cha-ching, right? So here I'm going to get 18 properties. Before this, I've only flipped one house at a time. And here's 18 properties. So we spent some time together on the phone, and I wrote down all of his addresses. And then I scheduled a time to go back up to Waco and just drive by the outside. He had mentioned to me that 3 of the properties were actually rented and the rest were vacant. So if the door was open, feel free to walk through. We get up there, I start driving some properties, and I can tell you some of these properties were destroyed. Like, they were so bad shape, nobody could even live in these properties. There was this one property that looked pretty nice. So I stopped the car, I start to go inside, and the front door was open. And I'm walking through and it was completely vacant. I thought, man, this may be one of the best properties on the list. So I'm walking through and I open the bedroom door, and there's a guy standing right there. About freaked me out. And it was just a bum sitting in the property, just, a place to sleep. And I'm like, "Man, you got to get out of this property." He's like, okay, I'll get out. So I continually drive the rest of the day looking at the other properties. And I said, "Hey, I want to go back to that one property because I thought that was the best property." So I drive up, and I'm not kidding you, as I pull into the front of the house, and this is a white house. This guy had his rear end outside the window, you know what, and it was the most disgusting thing I think I've ever seen in real estate. And but anyways, I went back home and I started to gather, just an estimate of repairs. And at this point, I really didn't have a clue. It looked like the whole house needed to be torn down, at least most of them. I just ran some basic numbers. And when I totaled up my offer, it was $130,000 for 18 houses. So I was like, ooh, that just seemed low. So I called the owner and I said, "Hey, this is Chris again. And I did have a chance. I didn't go into every property, but I wanted to present you an offer. And that offer is $130,000. And it got quiet, probably for a good 10 seconds. It felt like a minute, but it was a good 10 seconds. And the owner replied to me and he said, "Hey son, why don't you come up and we'll talk about it?" And I'm like, "Not a problem. I can meet you tomorrow. I could drive back up there." And he said, "Great. I'll see you there. Here's my address." I'm excited. I get in the car the next day and I'm driving back up there. And then I started thinking, who is this guy? Maybe this guy might have a gun or something. Like, I don't even know. And I pull up into the driveway and he opens the door and he introduces himself and I introduce myself and we start walking in and he had pictures all over the wall. And he just started talking to me about him being in the war. He started talking to me about his grandkids. And then he asked, "Hey, would I like a glass of iced tea?" And I don't really drink iced tea, but of course I'm not going to say no. So I get the iced tea. We sit down in the living room and we must have had a 45-minute conversation just about his family and not necessarily what I did for a living, but just who I was as a person. Finally, he stood up and he looked at me and he said, "I'll take the offer." And, I was just like awesome, just ecstatic and, super excited to get this deal done. And as I was walking out the house, I started to think about, why did we have that long conversation? And really, we didn't even talk about any of the deals. And he was qualifying me as a buyer. To me, it seemed like here he had worked up all 20 properties, took about 20 years to get 20 properties, and he was selling 18 that he had left. And he worked his whole life and he just didn't want to sell it to anybody. So I go home, I put the properties under contract, and I want to show you exactly how we do that. So the contract to purchase, number one, we needed to put all 18 addresses on one contract. And I'm going to show you here in just a second how that actually looks. But I want to talk about what is the positive of doing this. Obviously, selling these properties in one lump sum is just so much easier, right? But at the same time, there is a negative. So there could be potential less money than selling each property individually. Now, I could have taken all 18 properties and did 18 different contracts and then sell them individually. But the problem was this guy wanted all of these properties gone in one lump sum. His doctor was telling him he had heart condition and he was stressed out about these properties and renting it for so many years. It was time to let these go. So just looking at the owner's situation, we really wanted to unload these properties very quickly, which ultimately he's going to be happy for. Hey, did you know that you could be the first to be notified when I release a new training video? Just subscribe and click that notification bell. So here's the contract to purchase. So in line one, parties, you're going to identify the seller, agrees to sell and convey to. That would be you. Now, of course, you'd want to put this in your company name. Buyer agrees to buy from seller the following described real estate. So as you can see, I literally put every single address. Now, this is just for example purposes, but you would list all 18 properties here. And then I also want you to put the legal description, which would be lot 1 of block 2 of this subdivision, blah, blah, blah. So as we scroll down, we're going to see all those properties listed out. Purchase price is going to be $130, and that's going to be for all 18 properties. The condition of purchase are as follows. So the buyer will deposit $500. And again, you want to keep this low. The minimum generally is going to be $10. Some sellers are going to want a lot of money down on this, but we negotiated $500 to First Title Company of Waco. Now, B, C, and D are just more of my contingency clauses. Just in case I couldn't find the buyer, you'd want B in there. Number 4, is there an addendum to this contract? So an addendum would be any other agreement not stated in this contract here that's attached to it. So in this example, there would be no. Is this transaction all cash or terms? We're going to pay all cash, meaning we're going to pay in one lump sum. 6 is just general possession will be given on or before the date of closing. Seller agrees to pay all taxes and assessments up to and including the date of title transfer. This would be normal. We decided to pay the closing costs since we got a pretty good deal at $130. Now, closing date shall be on or before. So when are we actually going to close on this? Now, we want to allow ourselves enough time to find that buyer to take over this deal. So you don't want to, go 2 weeks from now. You really want to extend this out. Now, you do have the option to close on or before that date, right? So even if you give yourself 90 days, you could close tomorrow. Obviously, with the title to the above described real estate to be conveyed by a warranty deed, titles to be free, clear, and unencumbered, free of building orders, subject to zoning regulations of record, except easements and restrictions of record. We're going to then go through this. This offer is to remain open for acceptance until when? So I want the seller to sign this contract as soon as possible before somebody else makes an offer on this. We're going to then date and sign the contract, and it's really that simple. So after I put it under contract, it was kind of a scary moment in time of saying, oh my gosh, who's going to buy all this? And the very first thing that came to my head was, what about the buyers that bought properties from me in the past? So I started to call those particular buyers, and I had one of my buyers that was very interested, and we scheduled a time to go back all the way up to Waco and just kind of tour him through some of the properties. He just wanted to make sure that it was a good deal. Of course, I told him when I had it under contract. At this point, I was like, I just felt obligated. Like, I got to get rid of this property for this man. And I'll take whatever almost attitude. I wasn't even looking at making a killing on this deal. I think in the beginning I was like, oh my gosh, 18 houses. But when you start listening to people's story and you're going through this deal, it's like, look, I just want to make it right. My investor said, well, I could pay you $18,000 for 18 houses. So that's $1,000 per house. And I'm like, I'll take it. When can you close? Because, I only have so much time to close the deal per the contract that I signed with the owner. So he said, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Now what we need to do is actually assign this deal over to my buyer. And this is how you fill out the assignment of contract. So now that the buyer wants this deal, we have to do an assignment of contract. So we're assigning it to just this one buyer. So as a package deal, we're going to put all 18 addresses on the assignment of contract, and then we're going to set up closing with the buyer's title company. Now here we have our assignment of contract. So we found the buyer and we're assigning our deal to them. So effective this day, this month, this year, it is mutually agreed that this assignment for the contract to purchase on, again, we have 18 properties here. You want to spell out all 18 as well as the legal description. We're going to scroll down from Chris Goff to Mr. Hyder is hereby made. For this assignment, it is mutually agreed that Chris Goff will receive $18,000 at the time of closing. So assignee agrees to perform all covenants, conditions, and obligations required by a signer under said agreement and agrees to defend, indemnify, and hold the signer harmless from any liability or obligation under said agreement. And again, that said agreement is the contract to purchase. Assignee further agrees to hold the signer harmless from any deficiency or defect in the legality or enforceability of the terms of said agreement. Again, referring back to the contract to purchase. We're going to scroll down. We're going to date this. We're going to sign as the assignor. The new buyer will sign as the assignee. And now you have a filled out assignment of contract. So after the contracts were all good to go, the very next thing is we send it to the title company and they're going to arrange closing. And usually at this point, you don't have too much communication with anyone. The title company is going to contact the seller. It's going to contact the buyer. They're going to arrange all the paperwork, do the title search and all that. So it's more of just a follow-up, just to make sure everything's on time. That's the most important part. So after we closed the deal, it was just a relief, whew, I finally made it through that, because that's really the first time, that I ever did so many deals on one agreement. Wasn't even for sure if that was even the right way of doing it. So at the end of the day, I put all 18 houses under contract for 130. I then sold my contract for 148. That gave me a quick profit, $18,000. So only $1,000 per house. Now, back then, I didn't know any better. Today, obviously, we would have done a lot better. But, I feel happy. I feel that this was, a small experience that was actually going to lead me into more experiences down the road, which a month later, it actually did. I found 3 single family homes, 3 vacant lots, 12 duplexes, and an apartment complex, and almost went through this exact same scenario. So it's like this deal is just setting you up for the next one. So after my buyer bought the property, he said, Chris, what do you know about Waco? I said, well, I think I've got a friend of a friend that's up here that's actually a general contractor. And he said, is there any way that you could oversee these rehabs? We need to get these properties rehab. So he was planning on renting out a lot of the properties and then maybe selling off a few of the properties. So I said, yeah, let me give him a call. So I called the general contractor and he said, absolutely. This is like a full-time, year-long job for him. He was all in. So I told my buyer, I was like, yeah, I found a guy up there. He could do 2 to 3 properties at a time. Of course, my buyer's all excited. Thank you, but I need you to oversee it. I'm willing to pay you $2,500 a month to oversee these rehabs. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I could do that. I didn't want to just be up there the whole time, but I could go up there maybe once a month, obviously stay in communication over the phone with my GC. And so I arranged all that. And then my GC said, look, we need some more help. We need some more contractors, handyman to come in and work with us. So I posted an ad in the paper in Waco and got a ton of calls. There was this one gentleman that we hired, and I actually visited him at the property to do the interview at his own property. And the reason why is because, he had 6 kids and he was struggling. He was struggling just to even pay anything. So I agreed to meet him at the property, and I walked in and noticed that these kids slept in sleeping bags on the floor. They didn't have any money. They didn't have any furniture. I hired them. I was like, sometimes, people just need a little bit of help. So we hired him, and he started doing a fantastic job. I remember one time, it was probably about 2 or 3 months into the jobs, where I had gotten a Home Depot card. My buyer, the investor, would just refund me each month. So that way he didn't have to, take care of the constant writing out checks here and there. So this family, that I hired, I had left my Home Depot card up there so I wouldn't have to go back and forth, and they could just go to Home Depot, get what they needed, and go from there, as long as the GC was, hey, we need this. So what happened was I got a bill in the mail from Home Depot, and it was like $6,600. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, why do we need a lawnmower and a weed eater and a wheelbarrow? Like, I'm confused. So I called my GC up there, and he said, Chris, I don't have your card. I was like, well, who's got my card? We have given it to this worker that I hired. He said, well, I haven't seen him in 3 days. So I looked further into the invoice from Home Depot, and I'm like, San Antonio, Texas. Keep in mind, the properties are in Waco, Texas. Why are we at Home Depot in San Antonio, Texas? He literally took my card and just started buying personal things because he left the job. I guess he made just enough money to escape Waco and move to San Antonio. Kind of, it really bothered me, because here I was just trying to help these people, give them a job, and get these kids, out of sleeping bags. And here to find out this guy leaves the job and then uses my Home Depot card to get these personal things. And it's like, wow, and I know Home Depot caught him on camera, and I just let Home Depot deal with whatever they were going to do. I didn't want to be involved, but I can tell you that was a big learning lesson. So we have all 18 houses. We made an $18,000 wholesale profit, and then $2,500 a month for 12 months. And that was another $30,000. So a total profit on this ended up being a lot more than I anticipated. And a lot of things happened that I didn't anticipate with this particular property. But I'm so glad I went through this experience, and it really helped propel me and also build confidence in growing my wholesale business. Thanks for watching, and be sure to smash that like button and subscribe. I have several training videos that I know will help you close that first deal, to more advanced trainings for those that are more experienced. And I look forward to seeing you on the next training video.